Hey guys, sorry I wasn't in class today. I thought I would be out in the afternoon, and then they told me late last night that I would actually be out in the morning, so I didn't get a chance to make a video. And then I was in training all day today and didn't get a chance to make one for during my planning. And this is the first chance I've had to do anything, and it is now 5 o'clock. So hopefully I'll get this done, get this up quickly. Then you'll have the chance to watch this and do what you got to do. Um, we're going to try and knock out as much of this as we can. I'm going to go move quick. So try and keep up. If you need to pause, go ahead and pause. But today we're going to hit alternate states of consciousness and maybe get to drugs and their effects on consciousness. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get rolling on this. First thing we want to talk about, and a lot of people, when they talk about psychology, one of the first things they talk about is hypnosis. What is hypnosis? Does it work? Hypnosis, as it's defined, is a state of heightened suggestibility which people experience imagined test suggestions as if they were real. Some people have been to hypnotic shows. I have never been hypnotized. There's some things about it that research suggests, and we're going to maybe get into those in a minute. One of the more intriguing things of consciousness is hypnosis. The reality of it is a lot less intriguing than a lot of what we've seen or heard. Most of us are not going to be going to watch a watch go back and forth or anything like that, and then all of a sudden go into some trance. That's not generally what hypnosis is. It is a social interaction, and this is kind of important, which one person, the hypnotist, suggests, and this is another, I would, when you're writing these down, underline suggest to another person, who is the person being hypnotized, the subject, that certain perceptions, cognitions, or behaviors will spontaneously occur. All right. Here's the important part about hypnotists, right here, is that there is no actual power of the hypnotist or of hypnosis. The power is not in the hypnotist. Anybody can really do it. The power of hypnosis is actually in the subject or the person being hypnotized and how open they are to the suggestions or how open they are of actually being hypnotized. If you get somebody up there who just absolutely does not believe in hypnotism, is not going to believe it in, and they're not going to be hypnotized, well, guess what? They're not going to be hypnotized. But if you get somebody up there who is open to it, who thinks it can happen, who gets excited about it, who wants to be hypnotized, then you know what? By golly, you're going to be hypnotized. So the power is not as much with the hypnotist, but it is with the subject and how open they are to suggestion. This was you don't have to really write this down, this sort of background information, but this is a study that was done in 1977. He said in an average testing session, 10% of subjects will be completely non-responsive. Means that will have no effect. 10% will pass all or nearly all of the items. All right, so they'll do whatever is asked of them under hypnosis. And then the other 80% will fall sort of in between. All right, so some will, some won't. Some will do some things, some won't do other things. So it's kind of, we've talked about bell curves. There's a nice little bell curve there. As it contains to being susceptible to hypnotism. However, susceptibility can be changed, as found out by another study in 91, actually two studies, by increasing people's expectations, meaning by increasing their susceptibility, by trying to convince them this is going to happen, and if they expect it to happen, then it's more likely to happen. I'll go ahead and mention this. Although most people believe in lost memories can be retrieved through hypnosis, something called the age of regression. 60 years of science disputes such claims. Basically, you can't really be hypnotized to remember certain things. This is kind of a Freudian idea that things that we don't wish to be remembered, remember, they get shoved down, into the bottom of that uh, iceberg, so to speak, that's into the unconscious. Hypnosis was used as a way to maybe bring that out. That's kind of been disputed over the past 60 years by quite a bit. In reality, hypnotic refreshed memories often combine facts with fiction, like the hypnotist asks leading questions such as, "Did you hear loud noises?" Well, yes. Now that's a lot different question from, "What did you hear?" And when we get into, we're going to get into a little bit of this later on how the wording of a question can change what the answer is going to be, even if it sounds like you're asking the same thing. What did you hear is a lot different than did you hear loud noise? Couple quotes here from researchers I'm not going to get into. This is a big question. Can hypnosis make people act against their will? Short answer is no. Not any more than an authoritative figure can make someone who is not hypnotized act against their will. We'll get into the power of authoritative figures a little later when we get into some of the experiments that have been done in the past. I think it's Milgram's experiment with the buzzer or with the electrocution. But some people are going to be susceptible to authoritative figures telling them what to do. Hypnosis and involuntary control. When under hypnosis, people subjectively experience their actions to be involuntary. Can they make people do harmful things to others? So just generally, that's not the case. I'm going to keep going because I do want to get into this. Can hypnosis alleviate pain? PET scans show that hypnosis reduces brain activity in a region that processes painful stimuli, but not in the sensory cortex that receives raw sensory input. So, and this is kind of big, hypnosis does not block sensory input, but it may block our attention to the stimuli. So, remember we talked with gate control theory of pain. Hypnosis does not close that gate, but what it may do is, we're still essentially processing the painful stimuli, but we're not realizing it, so we're not paying attention to it. We know hypnosis involves a heightened state of suggestibility, but some suggest it's more of a social phenomenon. Some believe the hypnotic phenomenon is simply the workings of a normal conscious and the power of social influence theory, which we'll get into next semester. There is a theory called divided consciousness theory. It is controversial, but it suggests we can run on autopilot for well-rehearsed tasks while consciously working on another task. Think about things that you do outside. How many of you all have driven? I think we talked about this the other day, maybe when we were talking about daydreaming. You're driving along the road, or maybe you're driving home, and you all of a sudden you kind of snap out and realize where you are, and you don't remember how you got there. This happens actually often to me while driving. That's sort of that is some evidence for this theory, that you can do things on autopilot for things, basically muscle memory, while you can your conscious works on something else. It is controversial. There is some evidence for it, but there's also plenty of evidence not for it. Like what we talked about at the very beginning about consciousness is that, our minds can only work on one thing at a time. So those two theories or ideas kind of butt heads with this. If you want to get into the summary of this, hypnosis produces an increased receptiveness to suggestions. Hypnotized people subjectively experience their actions to be involuntary. Subjectively means they believe it. Whether it is or not is up to them. Dissociation theories attribute to the divided streams of consciousness. Remember, that's what we just got done talking about. And then some social cognitive theories attribute to this subject's expectations, what effect hypnosis will have on them. It's all about expectations, receptiveness to the suggestions. All right, these two things are kind of the real big that I want you to make sure you get out of that. I do want to try and go ahead and knock drugs out since I've only been doing this for about 10, 12 minutes. We'll go ahead and do these. Make sure you write these down because you will see these again. A psychoactive drug is a chemical substance that alters, here's that word again, perceptions and mood. So those of you who may take some antidepressants, those technically, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. Physical dependence, that is a psychological need. That is a physical need for the drug. A lot of times it's marked by unpleasant withdrawal symptoms. Remember, we talked about withdrawal when you take something that your body sort of already makes or mirrors something that your body already makes. Well, your body senses there's too much, so they stop making it. And then you stop taking whatever substance that is, and now you're not getting any. Your body goes through withdrawals. It can be painful. It's rough until your body sort of realizes it not getting what it needs and begins to kind of remake those substances or those neurotransmitters. Psychological dependence is a psychological need to use a drug. So the first one, physical dependence, is a physiological need for a drug. Psychological dependence is a psychological need to use a drug. For example, it would be to relieve negative emotions. People who need to drink coffee or caffeine in order to feel good or to function have sort of a psychological dependence on that. Dependence and addiction tolerance. There is, I think it's called the law of diminishing effect or something along those lines. But basically, the more you use something, the less of an effect it will have. Again, the body begins to stop producing these chemicals naturally, and a withdrawal is the discomfort and distress that follow discontinued use. Because once your body stops making it, then you stop. Now your body's not getting anything, and it's painful and it's not happy. Drug addiction. We've talked about dopamine before in the limbic system and all that. The dopamine reward center is the brain's pleasure center. The release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens of the limbic system creates pleasure or reward. All pleasures are registered this way. So any natural pleasure drug. So the pleasure you get from getting an A on a test, the pleasure you get from hitting a home run, the pleasure you get from making a basket, the pleasure you get from being with the people you love. All right, all those release dopamine. All right, and then is processed in your pleasure center. Addictive drugs can release 2 to 10 times the amount of dopamine that natural rewards do. Again, eating, money, things like sex. Sex will release that dopamine. Reward circuits in the brain involve motivation and memory as well as pleasure. So you are motivated to get more and you remember how awesome it is. Tolerance leads to less impact of drug on a reward center. Thus, motivation and memory of drug and reward center create demand for the drug or compulsive behavior. And that compulsive behavior is really what the addiction is. The limbic system will override the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, and all that stuff. And you can see that in PET scans and EEGs. Psychoactive drugs. Here's a list of them. Depressants, and some of these, if you've had health for any amount of time, if you had Coach Gasbrock's class in middle school, this should all be familiar to you. I'm going to go over it quickly anyways, because you'll see this on the AP exam. But psychoactive drugs, things like depressants. Think about the term depress. You depress things means to slow it down. Depressants reduce neural activity and slow body function. So things like alcohol is a depressant. A barbiturate is a depressant. Opiates, when you take pain pills, all right, those are depressants. They reduce neural activity. Then you have stimulants. These are drugs that excite neural activity. They speed up body function. So caffeine, nicotine, you smokers, amphetamines, cocaine, all that stuff, meth, those are stimulants. Then you've got hallucinogens. These are psychedelic drugs that distort perception and evoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input. All right. What that means is you're going to see things that are not there, or you're going to hear things that are not there. So that's what hallucinogens do. It makes you hallucinate. An example of that would be LSD. Here are some examples. I'm not going to go over these because you should already know these. Barbiturates, drugs that depress activity of the central nervous system, reducing anxiety but impairing memory and judgment. Opiates, opium and its derivatives like morphine and heroin, they depress neural activity, temporarily lessen pain and anxiety. And then amphetamines result in neural activity or stimulate neural activity, speed up the functions, result in short-term energy and euphoria. Ooh, this is great. Eventually reduces the baseline dopamine level and leaving the user permanently depressed. So you may have a dopamine level at this. You start using amphetamines. All right, yeah, everything comes up, but what happens is when you come off of that, your dopamine level actually is going to drop. So you're actually going to end up lower than when you started. All right, which is what makes these things fairly dangerous. And so you feel lower. Oh, I've got to get up again. So you take more, and then it drops down even more. And then you take more, and it drops down more. And every time you use it, you've got to use more in order to get back up. And then people OD and die. Here's well, you can see it as sort of a picture of how this works. Of course, here's your neuron. Here's your synaptic gap, neurotransmitters, receiving neurons. Neurotransmitters carry a message sending neuron across the synapse receptor sites on a receiving neuron. This is normal. The sending neuron reabsorbs excess neurotransmitters molecules, process called reuptake. We've already talked about that. But the crash is by binding to the sites that normally reabsorb neurotransmitters, cocaine blocks the reuptake of the dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. The extra neurotransmitters therefore remain in the synapse, intensifying your normal mood. And that's how this works. You've got normal, but normally once it fires, boom, they go back up. Well, what cocaine does, it stops it from going up, so it stays in the synaptic gap, and so the cell fires and then fires again and then fires again and then fires again. All right, and that's what creates that euphoric feeling. And then with hallucinogens, ecstasy, LSD, marijuana, or THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. You can kind of read all that. This would be good to at least know. I don't know if you want to copy these down, but this is fairly good and, where you have adverse effects. Here are the here's drug use trends. Seems like the most was around 78, and then around 1978, 70% of high school seniors reported using alcohol at some point. 38% reported using weed, and then maybe 7 or 8 reported using cocaine. It really fell off real well during this between the years of 85 to about 89 to 91. I think that coincides with the DARE campaign. And then, alcohol has sort of leveled off a bit, up and down a little bit. Marijuana has jumped quite a bit. And then you're starting to see a small rise in cocaine. Now, this only goes to 99. It'd be interesting to see what the next, what the last 20 years have shown. And that's all we got. So hopefully we'll get this online real quick. It is 5:24, so I think we did pretty well on that. If you guys, we'll do some stuff in class tomorrow. Hopefully you'll have time to watch this. See y'all tomorrow. Peace out.